He had the perfect job, the perfect wife, and a future anyone would envy. But one night revealed a truth so dark, it shattered everything. His wife was sleeping with his boss. His career was a lie. But he didn't crumble. He planned. He watched. And when the time came, he made them all pay. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's the story of cold, calculated revenge. The Horizon Grand Hotel glowed with soft amber lights, casting elegance over a sea of sharp suits and flowing gowns. It was the annual gala for Novaterra Industries, one of the most anticipated evenings in Seattle's corporate scene. The ballroom hummed with energy, a mixture of ambition, champagne, and carefully veiled competition. Among the crowd stood Elliot Mercer, a rising figure in environmental engineering, soaking in the atmosphere with silent pride. His arm linked with Lena Whitmore's, the woman he had once believed to be the cornerstone of his life. Her deep green satin dress shimmered under the chandeliers, capturing glances from every direction. Elliot had grown used to that attention, though a part of him still wondered how someone like him had ended up with someone as magnetic as Lena. As they moved through the throng of attendees, Lena's expression carried an air of subtle detachment, her gaze wandering across the room with intent more analytical than social. Elliot spoke of his latest contributions to a clean energy initiative targeting South America, his tone hopeful, eyes gleaming when words like Costa Rica and breakthrough floated through nearby conversations. That project had been his obsession for months. Research, proposals, late nights. It was more than a dream. It was his professional legacy in the making. Excusing himself under the pretense of grabbing drinks, Elliot left Lena with a warm squeeze of her hand, making his way toward the bar. The hum of voices and clinking glasses barely masked a creeping sense of unease that tightened in his chest. Something was off. His instincts flared as he noticed Miles Ashford, the company's CEO, staring at Lena from across the room. The look wasn't professional. It was something more invasive, something Elliot couldn't ignore. Before he could process the discomfort, a firm grip landed on his shoulder. Turning around, he was met with Miles' ever-confident smirk. The brief conversation that followed turned his blood cold. Without preamble, Miles leaned in, his words quiet but venomous. Elliot's position at Novaterra was now conditional. Unless Lena accompanied him to his suite that night, Elliot's career would be over. The moment shattered the evening. Elliot stood frozen as Miles disappeared back into the crowd, leaving behind a vortex of disbelief and dread. For a heartbeat, he hoped it was some sick joke. But when his eyes found Lena across the ballroom, laughing with a colleague, something flickered in her expression when she met his gaze. It was faint, but enough. A glimmer of awareness, of complicity. He returned with their drinks, hands trembling slightly as he passed her the glass. The woman beside him looked the same, sounded the same, but now felt impossibly distant. The touch of her fingers, once familiar and comforting, sent a chill through him. Their drive home was wrapped in silence. The city lights passed in a blur, Elliot's thoughts spiraling into a dark unknown. Lena, unfazed, tapped out a soft melody on the window with her nails. Back in their luxury apartment overlooking the bay, she shrugged off the night with a stretch and announced she'd be showering before bed. Elliot waited until the bathroom door clicked shut. Then, like a man possessed, he searched through her belongings. Her purse, coat pockets, phone screen reflections, desperately seeking anything concrete. Nothing. The absence of evidence only fed his spiraling doubt. Could it all be a misunderstanding? But the image of Miles Lear and Lena's knowing glance burned too vividly. When she emerged wrapped in silk and mist, he confronted her. His words were simple. He recounted Miles' proposition exactly. Her reaction was worse than any confirmation. A scoff, followed by a dry, amused laugh. She didn't deny it. Instead, she offered cold rationalizations, suggesting Elliot should be thankful that her actions had fast-tracked his career. With chilling calm, she listed names and situations, painting a history of manipulation masked as loyalty. The betrayal unfolded with surgical precision. Every promotion, every bonus, every advantage he thought he'd earned was just another piece in a game he hadn't even realized he was playing. Shaken and hollow, Elliot listened as Lena stripped away the final illusions of their marriage. But something shifted in him. The pain didn't break him. It hardened him. Without another word, he turned and left the room. Each step away from her a departure from the man he had once been. The city lights outside were no longer part of a celebration. They were the backdrop to a transformation, a warning of what was to come. The early hours of the morning found Elliot Mercer alone in the dim glow of his home office. The silence that filled the space was thick, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. He hadn't slept, not even tried. His thoughts moved like a storm, colliding and reforming around a single truth. Everything he had once believed about his marriage, his success, his life, it had all been a carefully constructed illusion. By sunrise, Elliot was no longer the man who had walked into the Horizon Grand Hotel the night before. That version of him, hopeful, trusting, driven by merit, was gone. In his place stood someone quieter, sharper, someone who understood the price of naivety. With methodical intent, he reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he landed on a name he hadn't thought about in years. Dane Kessler. In college, Dane had been known for his resourcefulness, the kind of person who could find out anything about anyone. After graduation, he'd built a discreet private investigation business. If Elliot was going to expose what had been done to him, Dane was the first piece of the puzzle. The call was brief but powerful. Dane listened in silence as Elliot explained the situation. Not just the betrayal, but the weight of what Miles Ashford had threatened. By the end of the conversation, the investigator's tone had changed. The drowsiness was gone, replaced by focus. Dane promised results, and Elliot believed him. Next came the second call to Silas Wren, a reclusive programmer Elliot had met during a sustainability conference in Zurich 2 years earlier. At the time, Silas had been developing an unbreakable encryption protocol designed for NGOs operating in politically volatile regions. Elliot remembered the passion in his voice, the obsession with digital security. That's what he needed now. Something impenetrable, a vault for the truth. Silas answered on the third ring, his voice crackling through a cluttered background of humming servers and low music. Elliot didn't explain everything. He simply said he needed the encryption system, and he needed it yesterday. Silas agreed, enthusiasm building as the challenge sparked something inside him. 48 hours, he promised. It would be done. The final call was the riskiest. Roman Vance, an old friend turned HR executive at a direct competitor of Novaterra. Elliot's pulse raced as the phone rang, his career teetering on the edge of a decision that could end everything or give him back his future. Roman picked up with a mixture of surprise and caution. Elliot didn't waste time with pleasantries. He spoke of the Costa Rica project, the one Novaterra had dangled in front of him like a reward, only to tear it away. He offered Roman a deal. Bring him on board, take the project, and in return, receive the technological leap Novaterra had invested months in. Roman hesitated only for a moment. A coup like this was rare. He knew the value of what Elliot was offering. By the time the sun crested over the rooftops of Seattle, Elliot had mobilized a network that could topple giants. His plan wasn't impulsive. It was evolving with each breath, with each keystroke and recorded memory. And every step was being taken with the patience of someone who had been taught the hard way not to trust too easily. Over the next few days, Elliot operated in a strange duality. Outwardly, he remained calm, arriving at Novaterra early, participating in meetings, keeping his performance spotless. But behind the scenes, he was building something vast. A fortress of truth, encrypted and backed up across multiple secure servers. Every document Dane uncovered, every email, text, bank transfer, hotel reservation, it all became part of the archive. There was no satisfaction in what he was doing, only necessity. What Elliot found most disturbing weren't the details of the affair. They were vile enough, but the way Lena had spoken about him to others. In emails Dane recovered, she had mocked his work ethic, downplayed his intelligence, and framed their relationship as a strategic partnership rather than a marriage. It wasn't just betrayal, it was disdain. Each new piece of evidence became another brick in the wall Elliot was constructing between who he had been and who he was becoming. He started documenting everything, Interactions with Miles, glimpses of Lena's carefully crafted facade cracking when she thought she wasn't being watched. He turned their apartment into a quiet surveillance zone, not to invade, but to protect himself from any further manipulation. One night, as he reviewed hours of audio files, a hidden camera captured Lena whispering into her phone. She believed he was asleep. Her words were clear, calculated. She spoke of Elliot's removal from Novaterra as an inevitability, a box that just needed to be checked. That was the moment Elliot stopped hoping for closure. He didn't want reconciliation. He didn't want apologies. He wanted consequences. The weeks that followed Elliot Mercer's awakening moved with surgical precision. By day, he played the part of the diligent engineer, fully engaged in meetings and project updates. His face remained composed, his responses measured. To anyone observing, he was simply a professional going through a rough patch. But beneath the surface, Elliot was orchestrating something far more calculated. Behind closed doors, his evenings were consumed by the cold, methodical assembly of truth. The encrypted vault Silas Wren had built for him was now loaded with irrefutable evidence. Financial anomalies, compromising communications, and carefully documented behavior. Every file Dane Kessler provided was logged and timestamped. Nothing was left to chance. One evening, as the office lights flickered low, Elliot noticed Miles Ashford approaching his workstation with that same sickly smooth charm. There was an unsettling ease in his tone, laced with false concern. He made a vague remark about Elliot working late and needing rest, but the underlying message was clear. Miles wanted him gone. Elliot returned the same polite nod and watched as his superior strolled away with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. That night, a message from Dane confirmed what Elliot had already suspected. Miles had been manipulating Novaterra's financial records for years, diverting funds and erasing traces with professional precision. Lena's role was more disturbing. She hadn't merely been a pawn. She had been an active participant, securing career advantages in exchange for personal favors, and now she was preparing for the next step, Elliot's professional demise. Days later, it came. A fabricated crisis burst into his inbox early on a Monday. An emergency meeting was scheduled, no agenda, no explanation. When Elliot arrived, the atmosphere was electric with stage tension. Celeste Moran, head of HR, sat across the table, flanked by Miles and Lena. They accused Elliot of corporate misconduct, unauthorized data access, alleged collusion with a competitor. The evidence was conveniently ready: files, timestamps, internal logs. Every piece pointed to guilt. Elliot listened without interruption, nodding slowly, playing his role. His heart pounded, but his face remained still. He asked only for the opportunity to gather his personal belongings, a request Celeste granted with obvious discomfort. As Elliot was escorted to his office, he sent a silent signal to Silas. Green light. Lena appeared moments later with a performance of false sympathy, offering to help pack. She accidentally knocked over a cup of coffee onto a stack of handwritten project notes. Elliot watched the liquid soak into the paper as she offered a hollow apology, masking the calculated smirk behind her concerned expression. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every detail of this scene had been anticipated. The files they had tampered with were decoys. The laptop they confiscated was a mirror image, built by Silas to record every keystroke and hidden action. The real data had been backed up weeks ago. By the time Elliot left the building, stripped of his badge and laptop, his expression betrayed nothing. The others saw a man defeated. They mistook silence for surrender. That evening, in the quiet safety of his home office, Elliot reviewed the footage and data with Dane and Silas. Every moment of the trap, Miles' words, Lena's setup, the coffee stunt, had been captured in crisp clarity. Silas confirmed the evidence was airtight. Dane noted that with this, the case against them was no longer just personal, it was criminal. But Elliot wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. He needed them to believe they'd won. So he stayed silent. He let the gossip spread, the pitying glances grow. He answered no calls and gave no explanations. He walked away from Novaterra without resistance, even when his colleagues avoided his gaze, unsure of where loyalty belonged. Only one message mattered now, the one from Roman Vance, confirming that Elliot's new position was ready. The Costa Rica project, once the pride of Novaterra, would now be his to lead elsewhere. Elliot read the message and smiled for the first time in days. The time for reaction was over. What came next was execution. Sharon and Miles had played their move. Now it was Elliot's turn. The storm began not with thunder, but with silence. At precisely 8 a.m., every inbox inside Novaterra's headquarters received a message. No subject line, no sender. Just a file titled Internal Disclosures. What followed was chaos. Inside those digital pages were things no one expected to see. Internal memos, transaction records, hotel reservations, all cross-referenced with email chains that painted a damning picture. Miles Ashford's carefully concealed misconduct stretched back years. And Lena Whitmore's name was inextricably linked to it all. The documents detailed not only financial irregularities, but personal misconduct, patterns of coercion, favoritism, and internal manipulation that had long been whispered about but never proven. There were messages filled with thinly veiled threats, evidence of promotions exchanged for silence, and most devastating of all, explicit correspondence confirming the long-standing affair between Miles and Lena. Staff members froze at their desks. Meetings were canceled. Phones rang off the hook. Celeste Moran, the head of HR, was flooded with panicked inquiries. In the executive suite, Miles slammed his office door shut, face pale, eyes wild. He dialed Lena, voice shaking with rage and desperation. Across the city, Elliot Mercer sat alone in his study, dressed sharply, his expression calm. The final phase of his plan had been executed with surgical precision. The file that brought Novaterra to its knees had been timed perfectly, sent from a secure offshore server traced to no single source. All roads led nowhere, and yet the impact was undeniable. He watched as his former company imploded. Social media buzzed with leaks and speculation. News outlets picked up the scent of scandal, and by noon, headlines spread like wildfire. Elliot didn't need to gloat. He didn't need revenge in the form of public applause. All he needed was the truth out in the open, and now it was. Later that afternoon, he walked calmly into Novaterra's headquarters. The lobby, now a scene of frantic damage control, fell silent as he passed. Employees stared, unsure whether to speak, apologize, or simply avoid his gaze. Some looked at him with awe, others with guilt. None dared to stop him. He entered Celeste Moran's office without knocking. She looked up, startled, then composed herself. "I believe you'll want to hear this," Elliot said, pulling a small encrypted drive from his briefcase. Over the next hour, he played her audio files, screen captures, and hidden camera footage. Conversations between Miles and Lena. Discussions about sabotaging Elliot's career. Plans to remove him from the Costa Rica project. Every word was time-stamped, verified, undeniable. When it ended, Celeste sat in silence. Then she stood. "This ends today," she said with quiet fury. "They're done." Meanwhile, upstairs, Miles and Lena scrambled to regain control. Miles insisted on denying everything. Fabricated evidence, corporate sabotage, targeted harassment. He rehearsed every excuse he could find. Lena, on the other hand, tried a different route. She requested a private meeting with Celeste, attempting to reframe herself as a victim. She claimed coercion, manipulation, fear. She painted herself as someone trapped, forced to comply to protect her marriage and her husband's job. But Celeste wasn't buying it. The timeline was too precise, the evidence too clear. Lena's fingerprints were all over every calculated decision, every manipulated advantage, every lie. "You used this company," Celeste told her bluntly. "You used your husband. You're not a victim, Lena. You're a co-conspirator." Security was called. As Lena was escorted from the building, Elliot stood near the elevators. Their eyes met one last time. Hers were glassy, full of disbelief. His were steady, unreadable. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. He turned away. Across the hallway, Miles Ashford's fate was being sealed. The board of directors, summoned for an emergency session, listened to the recordings with stony silence. Victoria Ames, the chairwoman, took the lead. "We are recommending immediate termination," she said, "and we will be pursuing criminal charges." No amount of bluster or legal threats could change what was now public knowledge. The king had fallen, and Elliot Mercer, once the quiet, dependable engineer, was now the name everyone whispered with both reverence and fear. The game had ended, but Elliot was just getting started. 6 months had passed since Novaterra imploded under the weight of its own corruption. The once glorious company had become a cautionary tale across the industry. Its stock value cut in half, its leadership dismantled, and its future uncertain. Miles Ashford now sat in a federal holding cell, awaiting trial. The evidence against him, embezzlement, harassment, abuse of power, was overwhelming. The case had drawn national attention, and the verdict was all but guaranteed. Once the face of Novaterra's meteoric rise, he had become a symbol of unchecked ambition gone rotten. Lena Whitmore, too, had vanished from the corporate world. After her termination, her attempts to find employment were swiftly shut down. Her name had become synonymous with scandal, and no firm wanted the stain of association. She returned to her hometown in the Midwest, a place where whispers moved faster than wind. With her designer wardrobe now tucked away in storage and her reputation in tatters, Lena found herself working behind the register at a neighborhood grocery store. Ignored by some, pitied by others, judged by all. As for Elliot Mercer, he had disappeared from Seattle's gossip circles the same day. He walked out of Novaterra with his head held high. Rumors of where he went swirled across boardrooms and message threads, but few knew the truth. Fewer still understood the extent of his transformation. In reality, Elliot had quietly accepted a senior position at EcoVeritas, Novaterra's biggest competitor. The Costa Rica project, once a jewel in Miles Ashford's crown, had been reborn under Elliot's leadership. With full creative control, a dream team of engineers, and a generous budget, the initiative had already broken ground and was on track to revolutionize sustainable infrastructure in underserved regions. In the boardroom of EcoVeritas, Elliot now sat as both leader and architect of projects, of vision, of legacy. His name was spoken with respect, his insight trusted. What had been used against him at Novaterra was now his greatest strength. But success wasn't only measured in titles and contracts. Elliot had begun rediscovering himself, pieces long buried beneath the weight of compromise. He spent weekends hiking through the rainforests near his new home, capturing photographs with a camera he hadn't touched in years. He played guitar again, cooked for the joy of it, and slowly allowed the notion of peace to take root. He hadn't thought about love, at least not in the beginning, but it found him anyway. At a climate summit in Sao Paulo, he met Maria Estrella, an environmental law advocate known for her sharp mind and unapologetic activism. Their first conversation had been accidental, their connection anything but. They shared a passion for justice, for sustainability, for rebuilding from ruins. With Maria, Elliot didn't have to pretend. She saw the scars and she never flinched. Their relationship was growing slowly, deliberately, two people choosing presence over performance. Elliot wasn't in a hurry. He didn't need to be. The divorce had been finalized quietly, without courtroom drama. The evidence had spoken for itself. Elliot retained the assets, properties, savings, investments. Lena's attempts to seek financial support were swiftly denied by the court, citing not only her infidelity, but her documented role in dismantling Elliot's career. The final decree had been blunt in its assessment of Lena's actions, citing her strategic manipulation and ethical violations as grounds for full financial separation. When Elliot signed the papers, he felt nothing but release. Now, as he stood on the balcony of his oceanfront condo overlooking the Pacific, the sky melting into pinks and golds, Elliot allowed himself a rare moment of stillness. His phone buzzed with a message from Maria. "Touching down in an hour. Can't wait to see you." He smiled, genuine and unburdened. Somewhere back in Seattle, the ruins of Novaterra still smoldered. Investors scrambled to salvage their losses. New leadership was being hastily assembled. And buried deep in corporate training slides across the country, a new rule had taken root. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Elliot didn't feel vindicated by their downfall. He didn't need vengeance anymore. What he had gained was something far more valuable than revenge: clarity, self-respect, freedom. He raised a glass in silent toast. To truth, to rebuilding, to the high cost of betrayal, and the immeasurable worth of rising above it. And with that, Elliot Mercer turned away from the past and walked inside, ready for everything the future had yet to bring.